Hello, everyone. Today we have Tim Brown joining us. Tim is a property investment buyer's agent. He services all of Australia and has been in the property investment world for over 8 years now. So some would definitely call him a bit of an expert. Welcome to the podcast, Tim.
Thank you, Vanessa. I appreciate you having me on. I'm looking forward to having a good chat.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. So glad to have you here today and get some insights from you about how the market's going and just about buyer's agent in general. But first, let's start with what got you into investing in property about 8 years ago, you said?
Yeah, it's been about 8 years since I started, actually purchased my first investment. It was definitely a lot of thoughts prior to getting to that position. But as most investors now know, it's that first property is the hardest, and that's saving the deposit, which takes years. So yeah, I first started 8 years ago, building up my first deposit, consuming all the knowledge I could. I was absolutely consuming everything, podcasts, books, magazines, internet, everything in my spare time, because that's how it opened up all the learnings for me to then actually take action. So
How did
yeah,
you get onto that? Like, did you have a friend that was already in it, or did you just know that that's what you had to do?
yeah, it's a good question actually because I actually had one of my cousins who is quite a good investor. He has a decent portfolio, and him and his family were quite into investing. So I think that sort of spilled over to me. I believe I naturally had the mindset for it. I just didn't know where to direct that energy. So, as much like I spent most of my 20s serving in the army. And so, as much as that is very much a rigid, structured organization, my mind was very freedom based. So, I was actually thinking, I'm not going to do this forever. And I need to position myself and posture myself for success outside of the military. And I had to figure out how to do that. And so investing came naturally to me. Like that's how we break free of the 9 to 5 sort of shackles, right? And
Mhm.
I knew that time in army was coming. So my cousins and their families were quite avid investors, and so that spilled over to me and sort of led me down the pathway of, hey, property might be the game to get us out.
Yeah, yeah. Because did you know anyone else in like shares or anything? Like, did you actually think of any other ways of investing your money?
Yeah, absolutely. So once I understood that property is going to be the game that I can play, that we can all access because of leverage and other things we can go into later, um, the first obstacle was how do I get a deposit together,
Yes,
right? So
the
it's the
hardest bit.
cash barrier to get in. Okay. So my organization type of brain kicked in and I planned out my wage and my savings and how long is that is going to take. So based off, a strict budget and surplus cash flow, just doing quick analysis. Hey, if I can save this much a year, it's going to take me X amount of years to get in. And I didn't like that number, and most people don't. And that's probably what holds so many people back. Is like, what, 8 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it might be. It's quite confronting to sort of commit that long. So I actually started learning about how I can get into more accessible assets. So that's where the share market actually came in, to answer
Hmm.
your question. So I actually invested a lot of my savings, being the deposit or the starting of the deposit, into the share market and grew my deposit that way and actually reduced the time by less than half because it did quite well, for what I learned. So once I get my mind on something, I'm like a dog with a bone, right? So I started to learn everything about shares and
That's
how I
like
can
the
leverage
army
it.
mind in you, isn't it?
Pretty
You
much,
that
yeah.
discipline,
Yeah.
that yeah.
Yeah, correct. So that's how I actually got my first deposit, and then I exited out of that, and then put it into the first property.
Yeah, wow. That's really cool to know because I guess sometimes people just think, no, it's just the 9 to 5 and that's it. And then obviously some people get a bit scared with risking that money in the share market. I mean, any investment is risky, let's be honest.
Hmm.
But for you, obviously it worked and that's yeah, that's a really good way. So then after you bought your first investment property, how long until you bought your next one?
It happened really quickly, and this is what I often speak about with investors as well, um, in terms of the mindset. So the biggest physical and logistical barriers, like I said before, is that deposit building, is access to lending to go and leverage and then deploy that capital. But probably the other biggest barrier is people's mindsets, right? So actually trying to go against the grain of getting in more debt because we're taught not to do that, right? And then putting your money out into the marketplace where you're sort of thinking, I hope this goes up, right? That's the mindset that they have, even though obviously if you're investing correctly, you're being analytical and data driven, and you've got more of a chance for it to go up than buying your own home, right? But the thing is that people need to get over that mental hurdle before they can even see results come from what they're doing. So it's quite difficult. And to go back on what you were saying as well, when you said it's risky, again, to touch on the mindset, it's all about how you actually analyze risk. All right.
Mm.
And I talked of another thing I talked about with my clients too. What do you actually see as risky? Because in my opinion, right, and everyone is entitled to their own opinions, their own way of thinking, and it's cultural, it's nurtured, it's whatever, it's environment. But the risk for me was confirming that I would work 9 to 5 for the next 30, 40, 50 years of my life. That is the risk to me. So I was a young mid-20s bloke then. If I stuffed up everything, if I absolutely botched all my investments, I didn't care, because then I would learn, I would go again, and I have the time to make the mistakes and go again. But to not do anything was a risk for me. So it's about how you assess it too.
Yeah, definitely. Because you obviously didn't want to work 9 to 5. And I don't think anyone does, to be honest, if they do.
No.
That's great if you do, that that's your choice. But it's yeah, that whole thing of you want to be able to live a life of, or what we call these days, financial freedom. And I guess that is not achievable with a 9 to 5. So you have to find those other means. So in terms of changing your mindset, how do you get someone to do that? Your clients or yourself, like what experiences can you draw on from those?
Yeah, the thing I think I learned is you can guide a mentor as much as you can and as much as you want, but at the end of the day, it has to be the individual who comes to that realization, right? I did a silly Instagram post on this recently where I drew a shitty picture of me dragging a horse to the water, like that old analogy. Like, I can lead you to the water, but if you do not drink, you will not drink, okay? And that's just the reality of it. So I try to nurture, I try to, I guess, bring people's minds around to assessing things differently, like in terms of like holistically investing in the way we sort of live in our communities, in our life. But it's really actually quite hard to dare I say, indoctrinate people from what we've been taught, which is the classic: go to uni, get into personal,
Mhm.
home debt,
Yeah.
and then
I
get a
own.
job and work your ass off to pay down debt. Debt's bad, yuck, don't do it, sort of thing. So the hard part is for people who are older, they've had more time to ingrain those thoughts and those beliefs, those belief systems. And then you get me yelling at someone on Instagram or in a Zoom call trying to convince them that what they've been told is probably not right. And to break free of that, they need to do the opposite.
Yeah.
Right. So don't saving shit, money's crap, cash is shit. Like, you got to actually leverage, get more debt, and then you'll be able to go on your merry way. So you can only get so far with someone before they need to actually answer the call themselves and come to that realization themselves. It's still scary though. It's still scary for everyone.
Definitely. And I think what you mentioned just now about them having to come to the call, it's that, without sounding corny, like their life calling. It's like it has to be something that shows them that this is going to result them in a better life, a life that's better for them, for their families. Like, it has to be, I think, anyway, correct me if I'm wrong, like an emotional attachment to why they want to create this investment portfolio. Would you
Oh,
say?
100%. And a few other podcasts I've done, like I spoke about this because I believe it's true. So what you hear as a lot of the other investors and other people in this industry say is, don't be emotional. Okay. That's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous statement, right? Because if you've ever been emotional about something, whether it's happy, sad, whatever, good luck trying to get that person to not be emotional in the moment, right? So to
Yeah.
deny the human emotion is very silly. So the philosophy I take is, how do we redirect that emotion?
Mhm.
So one of the things I do, particularly with my investors and my clients, is try to extract from them what their actual why and their long-term purpose is, and then attach your emotions to that. And it's typically things like kids, right? Setting the kids up, leaving a legacy, having more time and presence with them, having time to enjoy things, not have to worry about paying for groceries or going on holidays or buying the new car, getting the car repairs, even simple things, right? It's not all about super yachts and champagne. It's actually about basic things that you don't need to worry about anymore. So
Mhm.
if we're going to attach or direct emotions to that and hold it to that journey, then we can then focus on the investment strategic decisions as being analytical and data driven and non-emotional in that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's like the drive is emotional, but the actual investment itself, like the
Perfect.
property,
Exactly.
is not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Yeah, actually, it was interesting because when you said that, I was actually thinking, I've actually mentioned a couple of times that, the difference between an owner-occupied buyer versus an investment property buyer would be that emotional detachment. Like, owner-occupied is more emotional and this one's not. But at the end of the day, they both have to have some kind of emotion. Otherwise, yeah, what are you doing it for?
Exactly right. Exactly right. It's just, yeah, like I said, the direction of that motion and then the decision making needs to come down to sound, accurate data interpretation and application, and then you
Yeah.
go away. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so wait, back to your property
Mm.
investment story. So you bought the second one not long after. Was that because you built enough equity in your first one?
Yeah, so the first few I actually used a buyer's agent myself. Okay.
Okay,
So
yeah.
obviously now I'm a buyer's agent, but back then I wasn't. I was still serving in the military. And I saw the value in a buyer's agent straight away. Then the main two reasons are one, lack of the knowledge, because I was in that sort of learning stage of not like knowing that I don't know, which is really one of the best stages, because then you're just like, I need to know everything, but you don't know, right? You're not arrogant, you're not cocky, you're not whatever. You're still trying to understand it all. And I still find myself in that position now, which is great. I try to hold myself there. So it's constant learning.
Yeah.
And then the second part was because I was in the military, I was away all the time. So it just wasn't going to work. And I said this with like I connect with FIFO workers now as well. It's just like you're away for a few weeks and you're offline and back and forth and stuff. So I use a buyer's agent for my first few and bought really well at that time, got some good equity quickly. And I essentially only really saved one or two deposits and bought about 7 properties from that just because of
Wow.
equity extract, go again, equity extract, go again.
Yeah.
And look, I don't recommend that for everyone because I went hard. Like I was extracting every dollar and I was putting every cent into it, every spare bit of wage. Like friends and stuff were going out for dinners and doing all this sort of stuff. And we're just like, me and my wife, we're just like, no, we're going to go hard in this. So
Yeah.
we set ourselves up that way. But yeah, 7 properties out of really 2 deposits, all from equity extraction.
Wow. That's incredible. And were they all, I mean, the properties, were they around Australia? Were they just within one state or?
All across Australia, like a couple in Queensland, one everywhere except for Melbourne actually and Tassie, but WA, South Australia, lots in Queensland and New South Wales.
Yeah, right. Okay. So especially, so 8 years ago, I mean, you obviously went through that COVID boom
Mm.
then. So that's awesome. So are you still investing in properties more, or have you sort of been like, no, that my investment property is enough with the amount that you have now?
No, I definitely want more. I feel like I'm only just beginning. So what actually happened was I hit servicing walls.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I used the buyer's agent, but I probably outgrew the buyer's agent in terms of what I wanted to do, and I didn't have the best guidance beyond where I wanted to sort of go. So I hit servicing walls, and that tapped me and tapped me out for some time, which is frustrating. So I wanted to continue to invest, but I really had no servicing, meaning the banks weren't going to lend me any money, well over, almost 2 mil of debt or 1.5 mil of debt. So it was like they were like no, and mind you, I was on government wages, so I was in the army. I can be the best soldier in the world, but they're not going to pay me anymore because of it, right?
Yeah.
So I was stuck there, and I wish I had some better guidance to go on that. So I'm looking to buy a lot more properties in the very near future for my own portfolio, and that means I do have to sell down a couple at the moment, which I am sort of happy to do. So I'm going to move on that shortly.
Yeah. So it's all about, yeah, assessing and then pivoting. And so that's what you're doing right now. You're sort of just seeing, okay, my portfolio has sort of gone as far as it can as it is. If you want to expand, you have to, yeah, change that. And has your role in the as a buyer's agent now, having your own company business, is that helping you now have more borrowing capacity, like borrowing
Yeah,
power? Yeah.
absolutely. So being in business obviously helps you produce income that you get in return for your efforts as well, right? So being able to be in control of my income means I get more serviceability because when I say tapped out of servicing before, it's all about that debt to income ratio, DTI. I had too much debt versus my income. So now I can control my income, in my business, and then I can raise more debt. And
Mhm.
there's also then like sophisticated structuring you can go into sort of help facilitate growth of a large portfolio, which I'm exploring now for these next purchases, hence why I need to sell down some. But yeah, it's definitely helping.
Yeah, no, that's really good. So you mentioned that you've got investment properties around Australia, but not in Melbourne and Tassie. So at the time, was that because it just, I mean, did you have much communication with your buyer's agent to explain why that was their strategy, or do you know why that?
Essentially, I was just going off whatever they were saying, and I got to the point where whatever they sent me, I would just sort of buy.
Yeah,
Um, in hindsight, I could have done better, but I guess every investor has a mistake. And if that is my mistake, like having opportunity costs, I'm really comfortable with that because a lot of other people, they go down the path of actually financially costing mistakes, home and land packages that don't value up, or not enough due diligence on a purchase where it's cost them a lot, new roof, whatever it might be, right? So if my stake is that I could have done better in my portfolio, I'm happy to live with that. But they weren't really interested in the Melbourne market, hence why we didn't get anything there. And it was more so opportunistic. So in my portfolio, I had quite a few townhouses and units as well, just because of the access I was able to get with the lending I could get due to my income. So I didn't have big borrowing power. But again, like I said, looking back, I could have done that a lot better. But
yeah.
that's a mistake I'm so happy to live with.
Yeah, 100%. I mean,
Mm.
you still ended up with a decent portfolio. You've maxed out your borrowing capacity. Like, I feel like, and you're still obviously in a position where you can live a life. Yeah, you and your wife, obviously were a bit tight for a while, but that's just a small sacrifice you had to make at the time. So,
Yeah, and having the properties, knowing that they're there as backup is phenomenal. Like, we always talk about property investment and the end game, like the passive income and what it can bring your lifestyle. But just having those properties, even though they're illiquid, meaning you can't liquidate and sell them quickly, just having those asset bases out there is a really comforting feeling to know that when we are going through whatever times it is, and particularly with the COVID time as well, if we're facing job losses or whatever it might be, we've got asset bases out there. Whereas,
yeah.
some people experience, wow, I don't have multiple streams of income. I've just got my job and I just got switched off because they said I'm not allowed to work anymore. Like, so that power that people had over you really solidified my journey in terms of investing because I have, I guess the word I could use is power to be like, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that because I have asset bases that can support the family for a length of time if we had to.
So most of your properties are positively geared now, like at this stage?
They were
They were. Okay, yeah.
pre-interest rates. And like,
Changes, yeah.
yeah, and same with everyone, unless you sort of already paid down the debt. Most people experience the interest rate rises where they saw the cash flows diminish. But that's just a natural part of property and property cycles, right? Where the cash flow keeps us in the game. Like I love cash flow. I think cash flowing assets are awesome, but it's the growth that actually makes us wealthy. The cash flow and the yields keep us in the game to actually facilitate that. And if you can buy right, depending on your strategy, and have cash flow at the same time to support your lifestyle, that's a bonus, but it's super hard to do. And there's so many variables and other things that control it that you don't have control of. I think you need to make sure your strategies align deeply with what you really want to get out of it.
Yeah, I was just going to say actually, so then with your clients, how do you go about that? Okay, so say you have a client, like we mentioned before, they want the best for their family, they don't want to work their 9 to 5. What do you sort of recommend, or in terms of a property, or what do you present to them? Like, is it cash flow positive, or in like I don't know, in an area that's maybe a bit more rural? I'm trying to think of where we can get cash flow positive right now. Or is it you just have to sort of create them, shift their mindset to think more about capital growth rather than cash flow positive? Like, how do you go about that?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. Essentially, we try to customize it to the client as much as it can. So my philosophy with it is that there's a million and one strategies out there and tactics and advantages that we can do and take advantage of in terms of building a portfolio or facilitating some sort of investment plan for a client. What it actually comes down to is a few key factors, right? So there's a lot of people who go, no, no, this is the only way. It's blue chip, or it's cash flow positive, or it's regional, or it's this. Like everyone is so hell bent on that. But I think we need to be more fluid, right? Because that might work for you, but it's not going to work for somebody else, or it might work for someone else, not going to work for you, vice versa. So we try to really apply a few key measures that make sure we know the strategy is right. So one of the big ones is going to be like your resource capabilities. What access do you have to resources? If you have a low deposit and smaller incomes that you can't facilitate lending in the best location, well, then you're going to have to pick a different strategy, right? Because you can either not do it or you can find what's the next best thing. So what I like to say is what's the most advantaged market for you based on risk tolerances, resource capabilities, like I said, the outcomes you decide on. So, and I learned that for myself, right? So I was, I guess, stuck in terms of where I could invest due to my income, which meant I could only get X amount of lending. So I only had access to certain markets. Like ideally, I would have bought in Toorak and Bronte and all these places if I could, right? But you can't afford that. And then also the second level of affordability is not just can the banks lend you the cash to do it? Can you cash flow that? Can you afford to hold it, right? So we got to analyze those two key metrics, then lay it onto the actual client's position. Then you typically get sort of the strategy. So we do buy in sort of really good quality regional locations if we need to for our clients, but we also like to put in clients who have better ability in Melbourne and Sydney and WA and SA, etc. as well.
Yeah, so it just depends on how much, well, I guess firstly, like their deposit, what their, borrowing capacity is. And so obviously you work very closely like with their broker and maybe their accountant as well.
Yeah, definitely both. And the broker's integral, like the brokers gives us the information that we need to then make some presentations to them in terms of what property it's going to look like for them. And we do really as thorough as we can cash flow analysis. So we really want to make sure the client sees this is the acquisition cost, so total capital required, and a breakdown of where they are, where all that money is coming from, excuse me. And then what's the actual cash flows of this deal? And we do that off a few metrics. We go, what's the worst case scenario rent we're going to get? And what's the best case scenario rent we're going to get? What's the estimated tax back based on your scenario, that information we know on both those scenarios? And then the cash flows during the financial year without the tax back. So this is out of pocket every month, week, year. And then when you get your tax back, this is the overarching cash flow analysis of your property. Now, what we're doing is we're betting that this negative here is going to be less than the capital growth of this property. If that is the case, this is a good deal. Can you afford to hold that property? So we like to be really transparent with our clients of this is what you're getting into. Does it work for you and your family?
Yeah. Yeah, and you have to be because at the end of the day, if they get a property, they're great. But if they can't make the monthly repayments or, you know, like they're not given the opportunity to know what the worst case scenario, because I guess that's the other difference between a buyer's agent and a real estate agent. A real estate agent will most likely give you this is the best case scenario, and that's all there is for your rental, income. When you ask, what's the rental income in this property? They're going to say 700 a week, and that's not necessarily going to be correct.
If they know you're an investor, it's always going to be inflated. So it's like information interpretation is massive, and then understanding a market and then understanding cash flows is so important to know as close as you can what it's going to cost you. Because obviously there's things that come up that you're not going to account for, a crystal ball, right? So say if the hot water system blows up, and it always happens, right? You buy an investment property, it's sound, and the hot water goes, the oven goes, the fan goes, the aircon goes. I reckon I did like 5 ovens in 1 week. I'm like, what is happening to all my ovens, right? It's just one of those things, right? It's a cost of doing business.
Yeah,
But yeah, you plan for what you know, you account for what you don't know, and then if that works for you and your family circumstances, then it makes sense.
definitely. Yeah. Yeah. No, I can definitely speak to that. Like, I think it was like the week after we did our settlement check, handed the keys to one of our properties. And then the light in the laundry went out. We actually didn't check all the PowerPoints, and one of the PowerPoints wasn't working. And okay, again, lessons learned, check all the PowerPoints. But yeah, so no, I definitely agree with that. You mentioned about quality rural areas, or I think that's what you said. Where would you say is in that sort of category at this moment in time?
Yeah, so as much as some people hate regional investing, like I said before, if you've only got access to certain markets, you're better off being in those markets that can perform in the medium term than being sitting out, okay, sitting out the game. So what we like regional Queensland at the moment, Rockhampton, Townsville, more diverse markets. So we don't really go to uh one industry towns, like your mining towns, etc. But places like Townsville, it's a really diverse economy. There's a lot going on there, and it's one of the largest cities in Australia. It's bigger than Darwin population wise.
Oh, I didn't know
Okay,
that.
so
Okay.
yeah, so it's actually quite a diverse economy. Yes, it's got bad things to its name. Yes, there's potentially problems, ups and downs, and whatever. But what we're trying to do is assist clients who can't afford this sort of blue chip areas that are set and forget hold forever in still accessing the 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 growth and the sort of returns you can get from property with leverage in these areas that are going through their cycles. So it's very heavy in data analytics to actually find a location that makes sense to get in. And then the strategy, like I said before, is personalized for the client. So it might be we buy in this location, right, at the beginning of the cycle, write it up for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and then either leave it there because it's cash flowing now and we extract equity and move on, or we sell down, we put in the next market, and we
Mhm.
scale a portfolio, not just in terms of value and numbers of property, but in terms of quality, right? So if you buy a couple of them because that's what you can access, then maybe in 5, 10 years time, now you can buy one or two much better properties in much more blue chip locations that now you can forget about. So it's like access and scalability in a different metrics. But
Yeah.
also like, you know, Perth and Adelaide sometimes are considered regional, but yeah, they're good spots too.
Yeah, and I guess your message there also is just get in. Like it doesn't matter where you start, the sooner you start, and then you can build up to those places rather than just waiting for, like you said, like earlier, 10 years or whatever it might be to get that deposit for that Bronte suburb. Not that you need more than just a deposit for Bronte now, but
I
anyway.
know you got to give your kidney and your left
Yeah.
ear and yeah, it's like a cult. But no, it's so true. It's about how do you play the game
Yeah.
with your cards, right? And so yeah, if you can get helped and assist in that, that's the way to go.
Yeah, and be patient. I think that's another thing that, sometimes well, I know it's human nature. We want things now or yesterday. And I think we just need to keep reiterating that the property game market is not a fast in out cash flow. Like, okay, yeah, you can go through flipping, sure. But if you are going to want like longer, bigger returns in the long term, you have to wait for the long term, right?
So correct, right? And that's where we really see the power of compound interest is over time. If you don't allow it enough time, then you're not going to get the returns. Now, obviously, building the portfolio, there may be, I guess, active strategies and transitions within that and transactions within that too to get you to a certain position that's going to facilitate the end outcome. But yeah, it's all about that time in the market as well, which brings its greatest returns. So we look naturally so close ahead. We're very short-sighted with this, and we're the way social media is these days and the sort of quick gratification of everything in society these days is sort of ingraining that in us further. Of why haven't I got passive income yet? It's been
Yeah.
6 months, mate. Relax. You know what I mean? So it takes a lot of time. And if you can just go and speak to any investors who, well, even ex-investors who have sold up their properties many years ago, almost all of them will say, "Oh, I wish I just held that property. I wish I just, because look at it now. I never would have thought. I never would have thought this area was a shithole. It was this or was that."
Yeah.
We forget about population growth and gentrification and compound interest and inflation and debasement of the currency, all these different things that work in our favor. You just got to give the time to let it happen.
Yeah, and just get in. Like I remember when I did move up to Queensland, there was a property on the Gold Coast. It was just like a studio apartment. It was going for 300,000 in Broadbeach, right? And that was sort of before the real boom happened here. And my broker's like, nah, it's too small. Nah, like, it's too cheap. Like, it's not going to give you anything. Okay, cool. You know how much it's worth now?
Tell me.
750,000. I'm just like
There you
kicking
go.
myself.
Yeah. And then someone would be doing a podcast in 10 years saying, "Oh, I bought that for
Yes.
700,000. How cheap was that?" And
Yeah.
continue. We're so short-sighted. We keep looking backwards and we're going, "Oh, look at all those prices. I don't want to pay this now." And then they just like they think that that's going to stop here. It's like they're
Yeah.
going to continue to grow, and it's only in hindsight you'll realize how much it's actually done for you. But if
Yeah.
you're not on that boat, you're left on shore, and you'd just be watching it disappear, right? And you'd be complaining about it. And you'd be one of those people, shoulda, woulda, coulda,
Yeah.
and then there'll be, victims to it as well.
And we keep saying, oh, no, the property market, there's no way it's going to go more. Right now, it's just so much. But you got to think, what did our grandparents say? Like our grandparents bought properties for what, 15,000, 5,000, or whatever it was. It
Yeah.
was, they would never have thought it would get to 100,000, let alone millions. Like,
Yeah, exactly. And one of the main reasons I believe on that is because people don't understand the fundamentals of macroeconomics and also our monetary system, like globally. Like people do not have a grasp on how money actually works, how it's created, and then how it is devalued by printing and inflation, and how, I guess, almost scammy and corrupt the whole sort of system is when you really understand how it works. So by those measures, by inflation, by printing of money, you will always have to pay more. So it's not just about somebody earning more than paying more for that property because they want to live in it. It's also that the value of the money that we use, and I say money, it's really just called currency, has devalued so much over time that you need more of it to go and buy the same property, to buy the same goods and services. So as much as we say CPI is X%, or we try and keep it within these, little 2 to 3% measures like the RBA, realistically, what's actually happening is the supply of money is just growing and growing and growing, and our debt ceilings just get pushed up, and then we're just getting so much more debt. Our entire monetary system is like a Ponzi scheme. So it just keeps going. So you need more and more of it. So we'll continue to go up. And they just keep bailing us out with quantitative easing. You need more cash, more like through COVID. Everyone, how much they printed more money during COVID than they did in the history of the country,
yeah,
right? So, and then people reckon there's going to be a market crash. Like, you're off your head.
yeah, they'll save us. Don't worry.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I started ranting.
I love it. I love it. Keep it up. So, okay, I wanted to actually to touch now on a little bit of what I just recently saw on your Instagram. By the way, guys, if you're not following Tim already, it's TCG, like
Yeah, it's TCG, the Charleston group.
the Charleston Group. Yes. He's got amazing posts up there and he really goes into some of the actual market insights, like what's happening right now. And one of the latest ones that you posted was about Melbourne and how we see that in an investment space. So, I mean, some of the things that have happened to me recently is I've been looking for my next investment property, and one of the places that I saw that has actually, not grown much at all during COVID, past COVID, has been Melbourne compared to the other states. Now, some people are telling us stay away from that, and some others are thinking, oh, maybe it might be an opportunity. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's opportunity everywhere always.
Mhm.
Again, depending on what your position is. But Melbourne particularly, we've seen obviously the post was about CoreLogic's release in the median dwelling price, and how in the first time in like 20 or 40 years, can't remember actually, Adelaide and Perth had overtaken Melbourne in dwelling. Now, just to caveat this, the dwelling data, the median price is very skewed data. So realistically, it's a bit icky, right? Because we have a lot more apartments and units and flats and townhouses in Melbourne,
Than
which
Adelaide.
obviously has less buy-in price. So it actually brings down the median dwelling price for Melbourne. But it has grown. What I'm really trying to get at, it has seen that big growth in Adelaide and Perth, but the data is a little bit skewed. Realistically, the house price in Melbourne is about that 920, 950. Okay.
Mhm.
But I use that to sort of show opportunity within Melbourne, because we are seeing in these locations, in Queensland, Adelaide, and Perth, prices that are much further out from the city with less amenities and less quality dwelling, going for, 6, 7, 8, 900K, whereas you can buy the same value property 15, 20 Ks from Melbourne CBD. Now,
Mhm.
that doesn't sound like a big deal, but when we analyze it on a whole, Melbourne's population is about 5.3 million compared to Perth and Adelaide, which is collectively like three something, both of them to get combined. And Melbourne is a world city. It is a knowledge center. It is a massive hub globally for people to come in with large incomes to start businesses, to build businesses, to do whatever. Like there is so much happening here. It's absolutely massive. So it will always continue to grow and have its big cycles. So Melbourne and Sydney are always on those radars. So if you're buying at that price point, why would you not want to be within one of these major cities where we're going to see high incomes in here that will consistently push up property prices
Exactly.
as well?
Yeah, because I mean, I've spoken to, my broker that went to the CBA. They had like a sort of investment strategy session. I think they do that yearly or something like
Yeah,
that.
they do.
They were saying, yeah, they were saying Darwin's actually had more growth than Melbourne. So Melbourne's the bottom of the bottom. I don't know what they were using to get those numbers, whether it was units or houses or whatever, but they were saying like the growth is just not there. And then I went to like the Brisbane Property Expo the other week, and they were saying similar things, that Melbourne's at the bottom of their cycle. But when you think about it, every single investor makes the most money in any industry, whether it's shares, whether it's Bitcoin, whatever it is, when it's at the bottom of the cycle. That's when you buy, right? So it just doesn't make sense to me why people would still be looking. I mean, obviously, yes, there's still more growth. I'm not saying there's not in Queensland and Perth and Adelaide, but if Melbourne's at the bottom, why wouldn't you just go for it there, right?
Social pressure, hey? It's again like contrarian investing, right? Would you rather buy Bitcoin at 50K and let it go to 100, or a dollar, let it go to 100? You'd be called an idiot at a dollar. You'd probably be called, something not as harsh at 50K. But you'd rather be the idiot with a dollar worth of Bitcoin and then it goes to 100K. So
Yeah.
on that theory, contrarian investing, it's just really hard to get past noise and opinions, right? So if you do follow me on Instagram, you'll see that I'm not a big fan of listening to any sort of major media because I think it's all rubbish. It's all doom and gloom, boom or bust. It's a lot of fear porn. So I would stick to what actually is happening. Data is very good, but data can be skewed. So you got to make sure you're getting the right data. It's being interpreted correctly and then applied to your investment strategy. And you're looking for opportunity. So being contrarian means you ride the full wave. Now, particularly if you have investments elsewhere and you've got a portfolio and you've seen growth and purchases in those regions we talked about previously, then Melbourne's a great option for you. The only thing to consider is that it's probably still got another 12 to 18 months before it really starts its cycle. So you'd be an early adopter. And the yields aren't very good, so you are going to need to cash flow the deal. So going back to the very start of the podcast, like, can you cash flow that? Can you afford that?
Yeah.
But it's going to have its run again because markets aren't linear. Okay,
Yeah.
they go like this. So if you're buying at the bottom of the cycle, you're going to get a nice uptick. And then hindsight will then teach you, hey, that wasn't the right decision. And you're going to be from the $1 weirdo buying Bitcoin to the genius at the barbecue.
Yes. Yes. No, that is a very, yeah, very true. I definitely agree with everything you've said there. Because at the end of the day, it's a matter of also knowing, like you mentioned earlier about Melbourne in general, it's the knowledge center. Nothing is going to last forever the way it is in Melbourne. Like, yes, okay, there's a lot of debt, there's a lot of screw up right there right now from the government, whatnot. But Melbourne is Melbourne. It is one of the top two cities in Australia. It will always be one of the top two cities in Australia. In the world, it's still considered one of the most livable places to live. Like, you just have to look at the infrastructure that's there to understand that Melbourne isn't actually going anywhere. It's not going to become like a dead city. It's going to rise again. It's just going to take its time.
Yeah, it's just market cycles. So there's definitely opportunity there. And look, one of the other considerations again is that the Victorian government is not very friendly to investors, which has scared
Yeah.
off a lot
Tell
of
us a bit
people.
about
Right.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, so there are considerations. That's, in my opinion, two considerations, major ones with that. One, it's the cash flow effects of having that. So with more land tax or with the sort of encumbrance of having a property at some sort of standard, which I'm all for having like decent standard properties for tenants. I'm a renter myself. I rent vest,
Mhm.
right? So I do agree with that. But if you're not doing the right due diligence and you have all these encumbrances of, hey, the property needs to be this, and you buy the wrong property, you might be up for 30 grand to rewire electrical wiring because it doesn't meet the code or whatever it is, right? So they're really, really strict on that. I think there needs to be a standard. I will caveat that there needs to be a good standard, but it's very much like, screw you, you're an investor. We get to take out of your pocket now. That is what it is.
Yeah.
And it seems to operate from social noise where people who don't actually understand how macroeconomics or microeconomics and markets work, particularly the property market, get a lot of say and push in policy. And then it really actually ends up hurting most people
Mhm.
because the government, here particularly and everywhere around the country abandoned social housing a long, long time ago and they outsourced it to private investments, right? And so that the people with mum and dad investors have the opportunity to invest in property and supplement their income and have some sort of investment vehicle for their retirement as well. But now that's sort of being turned on its head in Victoria. So it is a consideration about jumping in. Now, that does not mean that it's not going to have growth cycles like a normal property cycle. It's just a consideration to get in and it will change over time. I think once they realize the damage that can only really be seen retrospectively, things will start to potentially change and not loosen up, but just be more advantageous to investors to come back and sort of bring housing back. Because I've seen it myself. I'm a rent investor. I've seen rent prices just go through the roof, like absolutely crazy for dumps. But it's just because there's only one available. And then there's 15 million people at the inspection, and you got to have absolutely no black marks to your name ever to even be considered. So
Yeah.
it's actually making it more difficult and pushing up prices for renters.
Yeah. Well, here's hoping that things become a bit more favorable for investors. But either way, if you've got the cash right now and you can service that, I guess the message is go for it.
Yeah, action, action, action. Decisive action wins always. Even if you make like a subpar choice, you're in and you're actually going to, at a minimum, hedge against inflation, right? So just do something, and you will thank yourself later.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Thanks, Tim. One final question before you leave. I like to ask our guests, how do you invest in yourself daily? So I'm not talking about for your business, I'm talking about for yourself personally.
Interesting question. I like it. I invest a lot into myself, and that is essentially applying a very disciplined and rigid structure on my life as much as I can be, because I do have a young son and another one on the way very, very
Oh,
shortly.
congratulations.
Thank you, thank you. So that does dictate things, but it doesn't mean I don't get the shit I need to get done, right? And that's the biggest thing. And I spoke recently at the Everest event for the BAI, where I was saying, don't lie to yourself. Like if you're making a promise to yourself, show up for you. Like if you disrespect yourself, it's the worst person to disrespect because you subconsciously absorb that and it will affect your psyche and it will affect your confidence and will affect everything. So if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do something. So I get up early and I train every single day. I make sure I train every single day, invest in myself, hit those um, highs afterwards, endorphins and dopamine levels. So then I can start my work day as well. I make sure I stay fit. I eat the best food I can. I eat very healthy. I try not to consume junk, like education, junk noise, like mainstream media, TV. TV doesn't really go on in my house too much at all. We will watch something we want to watch, but I don't listen to the bullshit because it's all
Yeah,
fear and negative and doom and gloom. So I try to be careful what I consume in my brain because it actually has an output on how you perform.
definitely.
I make sure the people in my circle are good people. Like I'm very values based. So if you're not aligned in my values, then why would I spend my time and energy with you? Okay,
Mhm.
so yeah, I'm very much into self-development. So every day I try to get some sort of like podcast or whatever it is, just something to self-development, accountability, like all these things are really, really important to me. And it's just about being like 1% every day. How can I be a better person every single day? Fitter, stronger, faster, smarter,
Yeah.
richer, whatever it is.
So it's in every, yeah, it's every aspect of your life, it sounds like it, which is So great. And to juggle that, a young family and your business, like, wow, that's amazing. Well done.
Yeah, it gets hectic, but there's no excuses, right? There's always going to be a reason not to do something. And
So,
when it comes to particularly like fitness and sort of health and stuff like that, well, particularly a lot of people abandon that when they get kids. But like in my opinion, you should be doing it for them. Like you want to be fit and healthy and last and live as long as you can.
mm,
Set the example, set the standard, set them up for success because they will emulate, not listen to what you say. They will do what you do. And that's going to have a twofold effect. And then you are going to breed such a healthy environment to bring little people into that are going to be able to, prosper under your guidance.
yeah, no, definitely love that. They're going to copy what you do, not what you say. That's
Mm.
awesome. That's great. Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you for coming on the podcast. Before we go, also, how do people reach you? We mentioned your Instagram, but is there other ways?
So Instagram is probably the best way. It's the easiest. TCG, the Charleston group. There's a link in the bio if you want to book in a call with me. Otherwise, the website, thecharlestongroup.com.au. Yeah, they're probably the best ways to get in touch if people want to.
Yeah, awesome. And from what I understand, Tim runs his own Instagram. Is that right, Tim? Well, at least you respond to the DMs and everything. I mean, that's
Yeah,
how
yeah,
we
it's all me.
did.
It's all
Yeah.
me. Yeah.
So, and he does respond, guys. That's how he came onto the podcast. So, if you have any questions for him, just yeah, shoot him his way. I'll have all that information in the show notes as well, so you can definitely hit him up after this.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much for coming and for just providing amazing information. I hope it, inspires people to get their investment portfolios started or continued and to definitely look into the avenue of buyer's agents because, sometimes we don't have the time. So this is the best way to get that first step and the right step into the market.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. See
Thank
ya.
you. Amazing. Thank you. Take care.